here in Module 9, I almost said chapter again, but it's Module 9. Here in Module 9, kind of clumped together, right? We have the idea of what can a query do for me. So we have a make a table query, we have append query, we have a delete query, and we have an update query. And this is one of those times where computer science is done completely right by naming those things completely accurately, right? So a make a table query is a query that you run to get data from other tables to populate a new table. Boom, pretty good. That's a good start to all of this. An append query takes data and it adds it to the data that is already available someplace. So we're adding records, we're deleting records, we're changing fields, we're doing something to change the way, a portion of a database is actually structured. A delete query is exactly what it sounds like. And let me tell you, when you are running delete queries, they should actually physically make you sweat before you hit the run on that. Because in a make a table, in an blah, 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 blah. It is freezing cold down here, and it's starting to interfere with my ability here. When you have an append query, a delete query, or an update query, please be aware that the following thing is true and is alarming. That once you press run on that, there is no going back from those changes. So you will have made permanent, irrevocable changes via update, delete, or append. And that can be an issue. So given a long enough timeline, in everybody's interaction in working with a database, you will have mucked up that exact transaction. You will have said, well, I'm just going to run a delete query because I know what I'm doing, right? Because sooner or later you get that like database swagger where you're like, I haven't screwed up anything hard before. Let's do this. Boom. And you hit delete and records are gone. And now it's a problem because either something you didn't think about or something that you were not aware about is true about those records, but now they are gone. There is no Control Z for that. You cannot, simply rebuke those changes and move forward. So my suggestion is this because I have mucked this up. I have seen companies muck this up. I have been paid by companies to unmuck this up. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. But rather than run an append, a delete, or an update query, first run a selection query. What you'll do is it will return to you, the data via your selection so that you can see if it is correct. If you just close your eyes and say, run that query, and you are expecting the delete query to go through, let's say 200,000 records and remove 2,000 records. What proof do you have that in fact that was going to happen? You don't. You have a guess that was going to happen. But again, your guess is irrevocable. It cannot be undone. If first you run a selection query on that and say, with the same parameters that you would do for your delete, and look at what the resultant of that query was and go, okay, it returned for me, a collection of data that was 200,000 big. It returned exactly 2,000 records. That's exactly what I expected. Now you can run that delete query. The same rationale is attached to append or update. If you're expecting 200,000 records to be updated, but the selection query rather only returns to you 40,000 records. That's a huge mistake that you have made. So now you have to go back and look at the logic of your query and make sure again that, yeah, this is what's happening. It is my suggestion, honestly, before you run a query, an action type query, right? Where instead of just returning data, you're looking to actually have an influence on the overall structure of the database in some way, importing data, exporting data, changing data, any of that. Make a selection query that does the exact same thing minus the action that you're looking to undertake. Because what that's going to do is return to you what the answer would have been, but it will return to you that answer in a way that can be changed. Because once you run a delete query, they're deleted. Once you run an update query, they're updated. And if you have made a mistake there, the only recourse for you is to go back to a previous version of the database. Now, here inside of the scope of what we've seen for Access, there's not a lot of hands in the cookie jar, right? So when you're working with Access, there's one and only one hand in that cookie jar for that database, right? It's you. But in a business environment, that is probably not the case, right? If, heaven forbid, we're really working in a connected environment. So we have used Access here for a small shop, right? So we have 5 employees. We have hundreds of thousands of records. We are using Access. We are using, forms to be able to interact there. We've actually got a web form where clients can come through and make orders. And we have made a serious update mistake. The problem is there's not just you in there. Now I have 4 other employees that may or may not be relying on things that I have just now changed due to my mistake. I have customers who may be trying to use, an online form to interact with our business in a way that's no longer reliable because I have made a mistake. That is, number one, it's terrifying. Number two, potentially it might alter the course of some of your careers. So I have, and certainly we've had students who are like, I've made that mistake. That's why I have time to come back to school because I'm not employed there anymore, which really sucks. I think that is terrible. And I've done it before too. So, luckily for me at the time, we only had we had updated, it was a small, alternative middle school in Milwaukee, and we had a small single purpose built database. We were not using Access because it had to be all web, and at the time Access just wasn't the best solution for us. So we had built a solution using MySQL in our Red Hat Linux servers for that at the time. So at any rate, we had done a change to the data, and we were absolutely positive that we had it exactly correct. And what we did not do was go look back far enough at the data. We had just used a couple of months of data, and we had run a really superficial selection type query over there. And yeah, that sort of met our needs. So we ran the update on it. What we didn't know was some of our older data was still available, but under a different name. And that update query completely and totally, frankly, it totally obscured our data entry personnel's access to previous datas. So that was a huge mistake on our part. So when students would be enrolled in our program a year ago, they would have one ID, but then MPS changed, so they would have another ID, and we would have to match those. And we could match them inside of one school year, but not between school years. And that was a huge mistake on our part. Luckily enough, one, we caught it early. 2 days later, as a matter of fact. 2, we only had 3 data entry personnel, and there was probably only 900-ish records, I would think, in that range, 900-ish records that had to be, double checked for accuracy. That wasn't a huge labor. But if we were working with hundreds of thousands of records for like all of Milwaukee public schools, that would have been the end of my being able to work with them for that. So please do remember the update, the append, the make table, although this is not as big a deal, and the delete queries. Run a selection query first. Double check that you're right. Know what your expectation is. Know what the answer is going to be, and then run those, because that helps you keep your job, which is positive.